Welcome, and thank you for joining us for EMBCA's journey and reflections on Chios and its profound international legacy in commemoration and celebration of the 112th anniversary of the island's liberation from the Ottoman Empire. My name is Luke Katsos, EMBCA's president, and I will be moderating today's panel. Our distinguished panel includes Chios Mayor, Dr. Giannis Malafis, author, writer, educator, Aggeliki, Mastromichalaki, author, writer, Clemson University lecturer, and EMBCA director, Alexander Billinis, Peter Gerazounis, PE, principal of MG Engineering and president of the Panchiaki Korais Society of New York, and Markos is CEO of Marinakis chartering and founder of the Kardamylian Foundation. The island of Chios, located in the Aegean Sea, holds a profound international legacy rooted in cultural, historical, and economic contributions to the Mediterranean and beyond. Renowned as the birthplace of Homer, not Alexander, the legendary poet credited with the Iliad and The Odyssey, Chios has long been associated with the development of literature and oral tradition, leaving an indelible mark on Western literary heritage. Chios, known as the Mastic Island, is renowned for its mastic, a natural resin harvested from mastic trees grown almost exclusively in the southern part of the island. This product is used in cosmetics, medicine, and the culinary arts, contributing to the island's economy and identity. The medieval villages of Chios, like Pirgi and Mesta, with their unique architecture and decorative facades, attract many visitors. Additionally, the island boasts beautiful beaches, monasteries, and the UNESCO-listed Nea Moni Monastery, an 11th century Byzantine monument. Chios also embodies the spirit of resilience and cultural exchange. It flourished under multiple civilizations, including the Hellenic, Roman, Eastern Roman, Byzantine, and Ottoman, which enriched its artistic and architectural heritage. However, its history is marked by tragedy, particularly the Chios massacre of 1822 during the Hellenic War of Independence, which became an international symbol of the struggle for freedom. The event inspired global support for the Greek cause, influencing the art and politics of the European Romanticism, as reflected in the works of artists like Eugene Delacroix and writers like Lord Byron. The island holds a distinguished place in global maritime history also, boasting a shipping legacy that spans centuries. Situated in the key trade routes of the Aegean Sea, Chios developed into a center of maritime expertise from ancient times. Its people became renowned for their skills in shipbuilding and navigation, establishing connections throughout the Mediterranean and beyond. This seafaring tradition evolved over the centuries into one of the most influential shipping networks in the modern world. In the 19th century, shipping families from Chios laid the foundations for Hellas's dominance in international shipping, shaping maritime trade on a global scale. Following the devastation of the Chios massacre, many Chian families relocated to key trading hubs like Syros, Piraeus, Constantinople, Smyrna, Tehran, Odessa, Vienna, Marseille, Trieste, Alexandria, Liverpool, St. Petersburg, and also in the United States in areas like New York and New Orleans, Charleston, etc., where they rebuilt their maritime businesses. Leveraging their expertise in ship management and navigation, they capitalized on new trade opportunities, particularly in grain, textiles, and raw materials across the Black Sea, the Mediterranean, and Europe. These families were quick also to transition from traditional sailing ships to steam-powered vessels, ensuring they remained competitive into a rapidly changing industry. With the development of American trade of cotton imports to England to feed the textile mills, Hellenic merchants from Chios gravitated to New York starting in the 1850s and helped develop and took advantage of the pattern of what they call the cotton triangle, whereby they shipped American cotton exports to England and Europe throughout the port of New York instead of shipping directly from New Orleans, Savannah, and Charleston. The major Hellenic Chios firms in the U.S. from the time were controlled by various families, including some of them that we know, the Raleighs, the Rodokanachis, the Fasciri in New York and in southern states. In October 20 of 1855, the New York Times described the activities of these Chian factors and merchants in the United States in a feature article and the rapid growth in the U.S. of the great Hellenic commercial firms, such as the Raleigh firm, the Rhododaci that we mentioned, the Argenti, and many others, as, quote, one of the most brilliant episodes of commercial annals of the 19th century, and concluded that these merchants were, quote, as superior class of businessmen as the commercial world has ever seen. They were not surpassed by any race of merchants of the day, end quote. In the 20th century, Chios became synonymous with some of the world's most influential shipping families, such as Livanos, Chandris, and Onassis families. These families not only modernized global shipping, but also pioneered the transport of oil, making Hellas one of the leading maritime nations. Today, ship owners from Chios continue to control a substantial portion of the world's merchant fleet, contributing to the global economy through the transportation of goods, energy, and raw materials. Today, Chios, in addition, contributes to foster cultural tourism and preserve its maritime tradition, serving as a bridge between East and West. Its enduring legacy lies in its contributions to trade, literature, and the ideals of freedom and cultural identity, which resonates far beyond its shores. So as those who follow us, EMBCA, as you know, we always have amazing panelists, and today we also have amazing panelists. So we're going to start with introducing each one individually for a short presentation, after which we will have a combined group discussion. Our first panelist, we're honored here to have Giannis Malafis, the mayor of Chios, who was born in Chios in 1963. He is a radiologist and director of the radiology department of Sklerisios Hospital of Chios, where for many years he was the president of the Hospital Physicians of Chios. His first involvement with the public sphere began in 1994, when he was elected prefectural councillor with the late elected prefect of Chios, Yorgos Kaloutas. In 1998, at the age of 35, he ran for the newly established Kapodistrian municipality of Amani and became the first mayor of the region, a position he has held for 8 years. In October 2006, he was elected mayor of Eremopolis, president of the local union of municipalities and communities of the prefecture of Chios, and the Association of North Aegean Municipalities. And in 2011, he was elected regional councillor. In 2015, he was a member of the Regional Scientific Council for Research and Innovation of North Aegean. For 12 whole years, he consciously stayed away from the local government and decided to participate in the local government elections of October 2023, where the people of Chios elected him the mayor with a plurality percentage of over 62%, which is fantastic. Welcome, Mayor Malafis, and thank you for being with us today.
Σας χαιρετίζω όλους από τη Χίο. Μία εβδομάδα μετά την εορτή των ελευθερίων, της 11ης Νοεμβρίου του 1912, τότε που ήταν η μεγάλη μέρα της ελευθερίας για τη Χίο, μετά από τους αιώνες σκλαβιάς. Σήμερα, όπως σας είπα από την αρχή, είχαμε τη μάχη του έπους στο Βροντάδο, εκεί όπου ο Ρίτσος και ο Παστρικάκης έπεσαν για χάρη της ελευθερίας μας. Θέλω να καλησπερίσω εσάς που βλέπω, αλλά και το πολύ κόσμο που δεν βλέπω. Να του πω ένα μεγάλο ευχαριστώ, ειδικά στους Ελληνοαμερικάνους, για τη στήριξη του νησιού της Χίου σε όλα τα θέματα, ειδικά όμως για τα υγειονομικά θέματα, που η βοήθεια είναι πάρα πολύ μεγάλη διαχρονικά. Και σας ευχαριστούμε γι' αυτό. Και πιστεύουμε ότι θα συνεχίσετε να ερχόσαστε με την ίδια χαρά και ζέση στοιχείο όπως τα τελευταία καλοκαίρια, γιατί όπως είπα σας έχουμε ανάγκη για να έχουμε μια ισορροπία. Και λέω μια ισορροπία γιατί πραγματικά λείπετε από το νησί. Είσαστε από τους πολύ δημιουργικούς ανθρώπους που εμπλωτίζουν το νησί και όταν σας βλέπουμε είναι πολύ καλύτερα από όταν δεν σας βλέπουμε. Αυτό σαν προήμιο. Τι να πρωτοποιήσει για τυχείο μέσα στους αιώνες. Η τύχη της γεωπολιτικής της θέσης, η τύχη να είναι μέσα στο κέντρο της Ανατολικής Μεσογείου, την έχει κάνει από τη μία να είναι πολυφερνούς ανήφη, αλλά από την άλλη να έχει πάρα πολλούς κινδύνους. Αυτή η θέση λοιπόν, σε συνάρτηση με τις δεξιότητες των χιωτών και με το εμπορικό πνεύμα, αλλά και με τη φιλομάθεια, όλα αυτά ζυμωμένα με τη θάλασσα, με τα αρώματα του κάμπου και της νότιας Χίου, με την τραχύτητα της γεωμορφολογίας των εδαφών της υπόλοιπης Χίου, έχει κάνει μία Χίο διαφορετική. Μία Χίο με πολλά μικροκλίματα, με πολλά χρώματα και με κάτι το εξαιρετικό. Να βλέπεις και να ζηλεύεις αυτό το λίγο που φαίνεται όμως τόσο μεγάλο στα μάτια όλων μας, γιατί ακριβώς είναι διαφορετικό. Αυτή λοιπόν η Χίος διεκδικήθηκε από πάρα πολλούς από π.Χ. μέχρι και τους αιώνες μετά Χριστού. Έχουν περάσει πολλοί πολιτισμοί από πάνω της, αλλά η ιδιοσυγκρασία του Χιώτη έχει μείνει, είναι η κυρίαρχη μέσα στους αιώνες και αυτή που είναι και αυτή οδηγεί το νησί μέσα στους αιώνες. Η αγάπη και το ζήμαμα με τη θάλασσα γέννησε την ναυτιλία από τους χρόνους τους προχριστιανικούς, τους δύσκολους, αλλά η Χίος πάντα μες στη θάλασσα ήταν κυρίαρχη. Μόνο για τη μάχη της Λάδης μπορώ να σας πω. Υπάρχουν άπειρες ναυμαχίες που το χιώτικο ναυτικό είχε συμμετοχή, στις περισσότερες νικηφόρες, αλλά ακόμα και όταν έχανε έμενε εκεί για να τιμήσει τις συμμαχίες της. Μέσα στους αιώνες αυτό εξελίχθηκε, όλες οι γενιές ζυμώθηκαν μαζί με τη θάλασσα, μαζί με την τέχνη του καραβομαραγκού, μαζί με την αυτοσύνη, την κατασκευή από το ντενεκεδένιο πλέον βαποράκι, μέχρι που φτάσαμε στα καΐκια των Ινουσό, της Λαγκάδας, της Σικιάδας, του Βροντάδου, της Χίου, των Καρδαμήλων, και από όλο αυτό το εμπόριο που ασκούσε η Χίος από το νησί και από όλα τα παράλια της Ιωνίας, που τότε ήταν πάρα πολύ πλούσια, μετεξελίχθηκε σε μία μεταπολεμικά μεγάλη ναυτική δύναμη, με αποτέλεσμα αυτή τη στιγμή η Ελλάδα, που κατέχει περίπου το 24% της διεθνούς ναυτιλίας, η ελληνόχτητο ναυτιλία, το 13% περίπου να είναι χιώτο-εγνουσιώτικο. Αυτό είναι ένα επίτευγμα το οποίο είναι ασύλληπτο και δεν είναι τυχαίο όμως. Είναι κάτι που κουβαλιέται μέσα από τους αιώνες και γίνεται αυτή τη στιγμή μετεσίωση από γενιά σε γενιά. Τίποτα δεν είναι τυχαίο σε αυτή τη ζωή. Και ο Χιώτης με τη θάλασσα έχει μια ειδική σχέση. Αυτό το καταλαβαίνεις μπαίνοντας σε κάθε σπίτι στη Χίο, στις Σινούσες και στα Ψαρά. Γιατί δεν μιλάμε μόνο για το νησί της Χίου, μιλάμε και για τις Σινούσες και για τα Ψαρά. Μιλάμε για αυτό το σύμπλεγμα το νησιωτικό, για αυτή την τεράστια δύναμη, αυτή την ενέργεια που είναι κάτι το ασύλληπτο. Άπειρα μνημεία υπάρχουν, τα πιο πολλά χριστιανικά. Δυστυχώς στα νησιά μας δεν έχουν διασωθεί μεγάλα έργα προχριστιανικών ετών και της αρχαιότητας. Κατά τον Ντεκουλάνς και τον Ζολότα, αυτό οφείλεται στο ότι λόγω των επανειλημμένων καταστροφών του νησιού από διάφορους κατακτητές κατά καιρούς, αλλά και λόγω των πολλαπλών σεισμών που είχαν συμβεί τουλάχιστον το 1350, 1380, 1550, με τελευταίο το μεγάλο χαλασμό του 1881, δεν άφησε κάτι μεγάλο και ουσιαστικό και τα δομικά στοιχεία αυτών των μνημείων καλώς ή κακώς χρησιμοποιήθηκαν σε ναούς, σε σπίτια ή μετήκησαν σε άλλα μέρη και στολίζουν συλλογές και μουσεία ίσως άλλου. Και αυτό είναι ένα ερώτημα, διότι από τις περιγραφές που έχουμε και από τις σχολές γλυπτικής που υπήρχαν, με γλύπτες μεγάλους όπως το Βούπαλο, τον Αρχαίμο, τους Μικιάδες, το Γλαύκο, αλλά και τη μοναδικότητα της Χίου στην κοροπλαστική. Και λέμε κοροπλαστική τις σχολές αυτές που φτιάχνανε τους κούρους και τις κόρες, που είναι μοναδικό και σε όλο τον ευρωπαϊκό χώρο. Παρ' όλα αυτά, δεν έχουμε απομεινάρια μεγάλα από όλο αυτό το πλούτο. Απομεινάρια έχουμε όμως από ό,τι έχει σχέση με το διαφωτισμό και μετά την εποχή του διαφωτισμού, από την εποχή του Βυζαντίου, με τεράστια μνημεία σε σπουδαιότητα όπως η Νέα Μονή, όπως η Παλαιοχριστιανική του Αγίου Σιδώρου και πολλές άλλες μονές. Δυστυχώς από το εμπόριο που έχει σχέση με το μετάξι, από προϊόντα, από τα ελάχιστα που έχουμε να επιδείξουμε είναι μόνο ένα χαλί στη Νέα Μονή, που είναι χιώτικης κατασκευής. Δεν έχουν μείνει από αυτά τα υπέροχα κατασκευάσματα κάτι άλλο για να μπορούμε να το έχουμε. Και βεβαίως βλέπουμε μοναδικότητες της Χίου στις δομές των οικισμών, όπως στον οικισμό του εμποριού. Βλέπουμε τον αρχαίο οικισμό του εμποριού με δομικά στοιχεία πόλης, να βλέπεις ένα διοικητήριο και ένας ναός και γύρω μια πόλη. Τα πρώτα πολεοδομικά στοιχεία. Κάτι πολύ σημαντικό. Να μιλήσουμε για τη Χίο, για τη μοναδικότητα του κάμπου, την αρχιτεκτονική, που είναι ένα πάντρεμα της ελληνικής, βυζαντινής, γενουάτικης, τεχνοτροπίας, όλα μαζί παντρεμένα, και τα οποία μας έχουν δώσει αυτό το αισθητικό αποτέλεσμα που ξέρετε όλοι και που συνιστά κάτι το μοναδικό επίσης για τη Χίο, για τον κόσμο. Να μιλήσουμε για όλο αυτό το μικροκλίμα των μαστικοπαραγωγών χωριών που δίνει αυτό το υπέροχο προϊόν ανά τους αιώνες, τη μαστίχα με όλα τα υπόλοιπα υποπροϊόντα της και που έκανε τυχείο μόνο και μόνο αυτό το προϊόν να είναι κάτι το πολύ σπουδαίο. Μπορούμε να μιλάμε εβδομάδες. Μπορούμε να μιλάμε εβδομάδες. Αλλά σίγουρα οι χιώτες ήταν και του πνεύματος και της διοίκησης και του χρήματος. Σίγουρα δεν ήταν μόνο του χρήματος που πολλοί θα ήθελαν να τους περιγράψουν έτσι. Σίγουρα ήταν της αξίας, σίγουρα ήταν πάντα της πατρίδας, σίγουρα πάντα θέλανε μια Ελλάδα ενωμένη και μεγάλη και βεβαίως δεν είναι τυχαίο ότι σύντροφοι μεγάλοι του Ρίγα Φεραίου ήταν τόσο ο Κορονιός όσο και ο Ευστράτιος Αργέντης. Δεν είχαν τα λεφτά για να έχουν τα λεφτά οι σπουδαίοι χιώτες. Οι σπουδαίοι χιώτες είχαν τα λεφτά και πολύ εύκολα τα έδωσαν για τον εθνικό απελευθερωτικό αγώνα, όπως πολύ εύκολα τα έδωσαν για την παιδεία και στο νησί και στην υπόλοιπη Ελλάδα. Ήταν ένα φωτεινό παράδειγμα ότι τα χρήματα είναι καλά όταν πιάνουν τόπο και κάνουν την κοινωνία καλύτερη. Και έχουμε φωτεινά παραδείγματα από χιώτες πάνω σε αυτό, όχι μόνο στοιχείο και στον ελλαδικό χώρο, αλλά και όπου διέπρεψαν μετά την καταστροφή στοιχείου, είτε αυτό λέγεται Οδυσσός, είτε λέγεται Πειραιάς, είτε λέγεται Σύρος, είτε λέγεται Γαλλία, είτε λέγεται Λονδίνο, είτε λέγεται Αμερική. Θα δούμε ότι πολλά από τα μεγαλύτερα μέγαρα στην Οδυσσό έχουν χιώτικα ονόματα, όπως και σε πολλά άλλα μέρη, όπως και στην Κωνσταντινούπολη, όπως και στη Σμύρνη. Όχι ότι είναι κάτι που δεν εγκλωβίζεται μέσα σε 842 τετραγωνικά χιλιόμετρα. Είναι global. Είναι global, απλά στο πίσω μέρος του κεφαλιού του πάντα έχει το νησί, έχει τη θρησκεία του και έχει και τη φιλοπατρία με την καλή έννοια ότι αγωνίζεται και μαθαίνει και τα παιδιά του για να μπορούν πάντα να προσφέρουν στον τόπο. Με αυτά τα λίγα λόγια, μένω εδώ για να ακούσω και τους υπόλοιπους, γιατί νομίζω ότι μίλησα πολύ.
Δεν μιλήσατε πολύ. Ήταν very nice. Ευχαριστώ πάρα πολύ. Thank you so much for being with you, for being with us. I think what I'm going to do is just switch.
Μπορούμε να το ξανακάνουμε αυτό, ναι. Πιο προετοιμασμένα και πιο θεματικά και μπορούμε να έχουμε και διάφορους άλλους ανθρώπους από διάφορους τομείς και μου αρέσει πάρα πολύ έτσι όπως γίνεται. Και απλά δεν μπόρεσα να ειδοποιήσω κόσμο τόσο για να μπορέσει να το δει, που θα ήταν πάρα πολύ καλό.
Θα μπορούν να το δουν αργότερα, γιατί it's going to be on YouTube, so anybody could watch it and we'll come back to it. We'll come and discuss Chios again. What I want to do is just...
πάρα πολύ για την πρωτοβουλία και σας περιμένουμε το καλοκαίρι. Όσους θα έρθετε όλα καλά, τους άλλους να τους φιλοξενήσουμε έστω.
Thank you so much. I'm going to switch panelists for a second. I'm going to introduce now Peter Gerazounis. Peter Gerazounis is the president of the Panchiaki Korais Society of New York, a historic organization representing Chian Americans, founded in 1912, the same year Chios celebrated its liberation from Ottoman rule. He also serves on the advisory council of the Center of Byzantine and Modern Hellenic Studies at Queens College, and is actively involved with Leadership 100, the National Hellenic Society, and the organizing committee for the Greek Independence Day Parade. Recently invested as an archon of the Ecumenical Patriarchate and a founder of the Ecumenical Patriarch Bartholomew Foundation, Peter is committed to supporting Orthodox heritage. Professionally, he is a licensed engineer with a degree from Cooper Union, serving as senior principal and COO of NG Engineering, a prominent consulting firm with offices in New York and Florida, responsible for major projects nationwide, including the St. Nicholas Greek Orthodox Church and National Shrine at the World Trade Center. Welcome, Peter, and thank you for being with us today.
Thank you, Lou. And first, let me thank you for your unwavering dedication to promoting the education of our Hellenic heritage. We need more people like you to help us all become better educated on our heritage, because that is, if once you lose your heritage, it doesn't mean as much to be Greek in name.
Well, Peter, I just want to thank you again for your involvement in St. Nicholas. I was involved also, as you know, and thank you again for being a graduate of Cooper Union, because I also taught there in the School of Architecture. Thank you.
That's right. That's one thing we never talked about. So one day we'll have.
Yeah, we'll do that another day. Thank you, Peter, for being with us.
Before we go to the presentation, for those of you who are wondering what my background is, it's a view from my father's village of Siderunda. Those are the beaches, Yarita and Prastia behind me. So I can't ask you because nobody in the public out there can answer. So I figured I'd just say you had enough time to see it. So if we can get started to the presentation. It's a pleasure to be here today with some people I respect very much, and each of you probably knows a lot more about the history and impact of Chios than I can share. Even the non-Chiotes are giving me a valuable lesson. What I can offer is a snapshot of the history of the Chian diaspora, not just as president of the Panchiaki Korais Society, but as a proud Greek American on my own journey of discovery of my heritage, which in turn helped me define my role as president. I quickly realized that my mission is only successful if I help shape this organization to let as many people travel on that journey of discovery, so we can pass our heritage on to our children and generations to come. And by the way, I'm only half Chian. My mother is from Lesbos, and I'm just as proud of that ancestry as well. I have to say that because I think she's watching right now, and I hope my cousin George is listening to this in Germany as well. So I have to give a shout out to those from Mytilene. But at some point, you do have to focus on something. And the truth is, my focus on my Chian heritage has strengthened knowledge, love, and appreciation for the entirety of my Greek heritage. Because those who feel their ancestry has been diluted and they don't have a place to call home, they're at tremendous risk. Early on, I came up with the saying, our identity as Chians and Greek Americans is not something that can be stolen or taken from us, but can easily be lost. And with each generation, there are so many who are moving closer to losing that identity. One of the greatest gifts I can give to my children and their children is something my father tried for so many years to instill in me, a knowledge and love for who I am and where I come from. So let's start the journey, and I'm going to move quickly so I can give time to the other speakers. Just see my notes here. So Chios is the fifth largest of the Greek islands, situated in the northern Aegean Sea. It's more than 70 miles from mainland Greece, less than 4 miles off the coast of Asia Minor or modern-day Turkey. Together with the much smaller neighboring islands of Psara and Inoussos, they form the prefecture of Chios. As an island remote from mainland Greece, coupled with its proximity to Asia Minor, it was often vulnerable to attacks or occupation, whether it was by the Persians, Romans, pirates, Crusaders, Genoese, Venetians, or the Ottoman Turks. As a mountainous island, it relied on shipping and commerce to import and export various goods and services throughout the millennia. For over 2,000 years, Chios merchants and ship owners had been prominent in trade and diplomacy throughout the Black Sea, the Aegean, and the Mediterranean. We'll get to the modern day impact where their reach is global now, but for now, we're going to focus on times up until, say, the 18th century. From ancient times, the island had become the largest exporter of Greek wine, which was noted for being of very high quality. Chios is said to have been among the first Greek cities to mint coins as early as the 7th century BC, featuring the Sphinx holding an amphora and bunches of grapes, highlighting the value of its wine production. Chian amphora and minted coins bearing that symbol have been found in nearly every country with whom the ancient Greeks traded. Next slide. The island's most famous product, though, is mastica, a resin from the mastic tree, the Mastichodendron skinos, often referred to as tears of Chios, mostly for the teardrop shape as it flows off the tree, but perhaps also as a reflection of the sadness and the hardship the island has gone through. The only place it's known to grow successfully is in the southern region of Chios, in the 24 villages referred to as the Mastichoria. It's been harvested for at least 2,500 years since Greek antiquity, used for all types of purposes, from medicinal to embalming, teeth whitening, breath mints, and distributed to the known world at the time. Today, its popularity continues to grow worldwide, with its most widespread use as chewing gum, flavoring for baking, as well as mastic liqueur and many other uses. So Chios was part of the Roman Empire, and by the end of the 4th century, with the introduction of Christianity, became part of the Eastern Roman Empire. The Eastern Roman Empire was subsequently known as the Byzantine Empire, which ruled over Chios for the most part of 800 years. In the 13th century, the Crusades weakened the Byzantine Empire, and following the sack of Constantinople by the Fourth Crusade, and for the next 4 centuries was part of the Republic of Genoa. This is where the debate over Christopher Columbus's origin are derived. There's no argument that he was from Genoa. Whether Italian or Chian as a discussion, Lou, you might want to host another time. By 1556, the Ottomans, recognizing the economic and strategic value of Chios, invaded the island and expelled the Genoese, taking full control of the island for the next 4 centuries. Not much change from the Genoese rule, largely because of the mastica. Chios was given many privileges, and the island actually flourished under Turkish rule. The island continued to grow economically as population grew to over 100,000. The commercial and diplomatic power of Chios urged the Sultan to grant the island many privileges, which nearly reached the status of autonomy. For these reasons, the ruling classes of Chios had little interest to rise up against the Turks. Perhaps the most serious argument for not doing so still lay in the fact that Chios was nearly 2 miles from the Asia Minor coast, thus any rebellion was doomed to failure. From the time of the fall of Constantinople, marking the end of the Byzantine Empire in 1453, Greece was under Turkish rule, and for the most part, it was brutal. Throughout the centuries, uprisings occurred, but it was not until the early 1800s that independence was closer to reality, and much of Greece was ready to revolt. By 1821, the revolution had begun, but Chios was not ready. A large portion of Chians disagreed with the idea of an uprising due to the privileges they held on the island and the fear of reprisal. So in 1822, Greek liberators turned their attention to Chios. Uprisings began, but they suffered from poor planning and a lack of motivation and fear that the risk was too great, considering the benefits they were given. The uprising was quickly suppressed, and Turkish reinforcements quickly acted to carry out the Sultan's revenge, leading to months of massacres and atrocities across the island. By the end of the nearly 120,000 Christians who previously populated Chios, only about 1,800 to 2,000 remained. Over 40,000 were slaughtered, 50,000 were taken prisoner, and 23,000 fled to other parts of Greece and Western Europe. One significant historical moment came from Konstantinos Kanaris of the neighboring island of Psara. On the moonless night of June 6, 1822, following Ramadan, while the Turks, including their leader, Admiral Karali, were holding a celebration, Kanaris and his men were able to position their fire ship without being noticed. The flagship's powder store caught fire, the ship exploded, and all aboard were instantly killed. Turkish casualties included 2,300 men, including naval officers and common sailors, as well as the admiral himself. Sadly, about 2,000 prisoners also perished on the ships, but the sentiment was better for them to die than to be sold into slavery or be converted to Islam. The celebration was short-lived as the Turks proceeded to continue their massacre, but the act of defiance lives in infamy, and on Chios, Kanaris is a beloved hero of the revolution. While the massacre on Chios was an immense tragedy, it also represented a major turning point in the war. The Greeks, despite their successes in the Peloponnese, needed Europe's help. But until then, the European powers had kept out of the conflict, declaring their neutrality. Many had profitable trade agreements with the Ottomans, and their governments and monarchs generally frowned on rebellion under any circumstances. But the bloodbath on Chios disgusted the people and leaders of Europe. Articles were written in newspapers. Delacroix's famous painting, Massacre of Chios, offered a heart-wrenching visual depiction of the events. Victor Hugo wrote a moving poem, L'Enfant, the Child of Chios. Lord Byron, the most celebrated Philhellene of all, gave his name, his prestige, his wealth, and ultimately his life to the cause. And across the continent, sympathy for the Greek cause solidified. And I'd be remiss if I did not mention Adamantios Korais, considered a hero of the revolution, although he waged his war with a pen rather than a sword. Born in Smyrna, but of Chian descent, he lived much of his life in Paris. Having witnessed the French Revolution in 1789, while living in France, he raised the European consciousness about the plight of the Greeks under the Ottomans long before the start of the Greek War of Independence. Korais believed that Europe was indebted to the Greeks because it inherited Greek ideals, which were instrumental in Europe's age of enlightenment in the 17th and 18th centuries. His influence in Europe was a vital contribution to the Greek War of Independence. During the war, he wrote pamphlets, raised funds, galvanized many influential Europeans to support the war, and was one of the founders of the Paris Philhellenic Society, which promoted a love of Greece and its culture. I'll just throw one more thing about him. He died in 1833. His grave in the cemetery of Montparnasse in Paris writes with his own inscription, Aya the Mantios Korais from Chios, and buried in the foreign land of Paris, which is as dear to me as Greece, my land of birth. So here's somebody, you can argue, not unlike myself, not born in Chios, but descended from Chios, who refers to himself as Chios and referring to the land in which he lives as a foreign land, although he does love it. So it's a very important thing to connect with everyone in the Chian diaspora, which is now onto this slide. So the Chian diaspora was the dispersal of most of the remaining population after the massacre. It's one part of the larger Greek diaspora, which includes communities of Greeks living outside of Greece and Cyprus. Around 5,000 Chians, mostly prosperous merchants and diplomats. This included many young men learning the family business and satellite trading houses around the Mediterranean. Absent from Chios at the time of the massacre, they remained in possession of their ships and their trade goods and were able to sell into new homes, generally in cities where they were trading, notably Odessa, Alexandria, Trieste, Marseille, London, and Liverpool. After the initial uprising, recognizing a reprisal was imminent, around another 15,000 managed to escape the island before Karalis Turkish troops invaded. Following the Turkish attack, those who had the means fled to nearby islands of Psarat, Syros, and beyond. Most of those who were not so fortunate were slaughtered or imprisoned and sold into slavery or otherwise converted to Islam. In 1832, marking the conclusion of the Greek War for Independence, the Treaty of Constantinople officially established the modern Kingdom of Greece as an independent state. The political situation stabilized. Some displaced families returned to the newly independent country to become key figures in cultural, educational, and political life, especially in Athens. But Chios and other islands of the Aegean were still under Ottoman rule at that time. So, next slide. On November 11th, 1912, a day we just celebrated this past week, after the First Balkan War, the Greek Navy invaded the island of Chios. Following weeks of bloody battles with the retreating Ottoman forces, the Turks surrendered on December 20th. It took 90 years following the massacre of Chios for the Chiotes to finally be free from Ottoman rule. It's something very important because as much as the Chiotes do celebrate 1821, 1912 is just as significant a holiday for us. Today, Chios has a population, and Yanni, you can correct me, just over 50,000, nearly reaching pre-1822 numbers. Many Chians moved to the major urban centers on the Greek mainland. The island has a considerable diaspora abroad, notably in London and New York. The island is famous for its medieval its scenery, the climate. It's still famous for the shipping community. Greece is home to one of the biggest ship-owning fraternities in Greece, and we're going to hear about that more. Its chief export is still mastika. It also produces olives, figs, wines. Despite the present-day relative normalcy of the island, there still lingers an ever-present threat to the island, and to this day, we need to stay ever vigilant, and that's why it's so critical that we celebrate these milestone dates in our history. Despite being on the other side of the world, members of the Aegean diaspora maintained a love of their homeland. Early on, their identity was not just being from Chios, but especially the villages they came from. And this still holds true when meeting a fellow Aegean for the first time. The first question one usually asks is from what chorio they came from. Because technically in Chios, you're probably considered a xeno if you're not from the same chorio. It's not good enough sometimes for some people to just be a Chiote. In the late 19th and early 20th century, members of the diaspora in New York formed organizations that provided social support networks for themselves here in America, as well as in their home village. Today, there's still over 20 societies that represent their home villages, not just the Chios, but their home villages. In 1912, the first Panchiaki society was formed and named after Adamantios Korais. The picture shown is from the first annual dance of the Panchiaki Korais Society, which took place on March 18th, 1913 in New York City on their first anniversary. I just want to take a moment to talk about the evolution using our society as an example. The founding of this and almost all Hellenic organizations was driven by and identified as immigrants who recognized the need for support, companionship, fellowship in a country where they felt like outsiders, who also wanted to give back and support their homeland. In addition to being a social network, they raised money for various philanthropic endeavors and promoted educational and cultural programs. Picture on the left is the 1950 Board of Trustees, near and dear to my heart. In the 1940s and 50s, they had a Knights of Education Fund where they sponsored 18 graduates from the high school in Chios to come to the United States to achieve their education. Many went on to become successful and impactful in their own ways. One was an MIT graduate, became a naval architect in Washington, D.C. area. Others included a professor and a chemist for the EPA, both of whom gave back to the society through the remainder of their lives, serving on the board as presidents. I just like to say the chemist made one of the biggest contributions, as he was my father, Stelios Gerazounis, who was the last student sponsored through this program in 1952. The picture on the right, the 1973 Board of Trustees, he is the second to the left on the front row. Next slide. Then in 2004, I had joined the board. I was a young board member serving at the behest of my father, which many loyal and good sons and daughters do. I'm standing at the left. My father's sitting third from the left. I was a trooper. After all, I grew up as a child of the organization, participating in the youth and dance groups and such. I tried very hard to contribute, but I can honestly say what I experienced in those years was symptomatic of problems that many Hellenic organizations still have today. The old guard holds on too long and insists on conducting business in the Greek language. Not that the Greek language is something we shouldn't be learning, but if you're trying to get the young adults who are the future of your organizations, you need to encourage them. And in the United States, English is the language of business. So without knowing it, they turn their young adults away, diminishing their own future existence. The reality is the Hellenic organizations today serve a much different and more impactful purpose. Their identity is now that of American-born Aegean Americans who are well established here, but recognize the need to also maintain their identity as descendants of a rich and proud culture that comes from a beautiful island full of historic significance. The 2024 board now includes my own son, but more notably, he's one of 4 members under the age of 30. Nearly half of our board members are women, and we conduct business in English. And our membership is growing at the fastest rate it has in our history. So let's not miss out on cultivating the next group of Adamantio Koraises, proud of their Aegean descent and helping shape the course of Chios, Greece, and the world for the better. So thank you. That's it for my
thank you, Peter. And to your comment about Christopher Columbus, I'm not going to go into it because obviously I could spend another hour discussing Christopher Columbus. But I will say the person who did the most analysis of this was Seraphim Kanoutis, and who is the first historian, let's say, of the diaspora from Greece. And his particular work was fantastic. But we'll discuss this another day. Our next panelist, and we're so glad to have her. She's in Athens right now, and obviously in New York on a whirlwind tour and trip. She's absolutely amazing. She's of course Aggeliki, Mastromichalaki. She was born on the island of Chios, holds a PhD in philosophy from the National Kapodistrian University in Athens, with a background in pedagogy, psychology, and philosophy. She worked in public education for over a decade, including 10 years as a primary school principal. Since 2021, she has been an academic director of the Greek language learning platform Elinopoula.com. She is a prolific author of children's books, including My Roots, a bilingual text used in teaching Hellenic children abroad. Her works, published in Hellas, America, Canada, and Australia, include literary and educational texts, as well as contributions to scientific and literary collections. Aggeliki has participated in research programs and international conferences on education, innovative teaching, and children's literature. She has trained teachers, designed educational programs, and promoted literacy through television, radio, and newspaper columns, including her long-running radio show, Children's Literature and the Education of Our Children. A former secretary of the Greek Children's Book Awards Committee, she continues to engage with readers at schools, festivals, and cultural events across the Hellenic Republic and beyond. Welcome, Aggeliki, and thank you for being with us today.
Σας ευχαριστώ πολύ. Ευχαριστώ τον κύριο Κάτσο και όλη την ομάδα για αυτή την πολύ όμορφη πρόσκληση και συνάντηση. Χαίρομαι που βρίσκομαι και εγώ ανάμεσα στους χίους, χιώτες σε όλο τον κόσμο. Θα ήθελα αν μπορούσα να κάνω αυτό το μοίρασμα της παρουσίασης. Ωραία, νομίζω ότι μπορούμε. Και χαίρομαι που είμαστε πάλι κοντά, χιώτες και χιώτισσες από όλο τον κόσμο. Καλησπέρα λοιπόν και από μένα, από την Αθήνα σήμερα. Ένα ταξίδι με προβληματισμούς για τη Χίο μας, για τη βαθιά κληρονομιά μας, αλλά και κυρίως από το τότε, τα όσα ωραία ακούσαμε από το δήμαρχό μας, μέχρι και το σήμερα. Να μπορέσουμε να ταξιδέψουμε λοιπόν στη Χίο μας μέσα από μια όμορφη παρουσίαση που έχουμε ετοιμάσει σήμερα για να πάμε σε αυτό το ωραίο νησί. Όπως λέει, συγγνώμη, δώστε μου 2 λεπτά να μπορέσουμε να κάνουμε την παρουσίασή μας. Συγγνώμη. Ωραίο νησί, λέει ο Δροσίνης, για τη Χίο μας. Ωραίο νησί. Και ο περιηγητής Φρανσουά Περιλά αναφέρει τη Χίο σαν ένα ευτυχισμένο νησί. Πάμε λοιπόν και εμείς να ταξιδέψουμε μέσα σε αυτή την ομορφιά. Η Χίος, ένα σταυροδρόμιο, όπως ακούσαμε, πολιτιστικών και εμπορικών δρόμων, προσέλκυσε από νωρίς ταξιδιώτες, οι οποίοι και περιηγητές επισκέπτονταν το νησί και κατέγραφαν τις εντυπώσεις τους. Ο Φρανσουά Περιλά έφτασε στη Χίο ως περιηγητής στις αρχές του 20ου αιώνα. Ήταν φιλοξενούμενος των σπουδαίων Χίων Γεωργίου Χορέμη, Λεωνί Καλβοκορέση και Νικόλαο Πασπάτη. Ταξίδεψε σε όλο το νησί και κατέγραψε εμπειρίες και εντυπώσεις και δημιούργησε στη γαλλική γλώσσα έναν οδηγό, θα λέγαμε, εκείνης της εποχής. Ο Περιλά γνώρισε και κατέγραψε το χειακό τοπίο, τη χειακή ζωή, και είμαστε περίπου μεταξύ 1912 με 1920, 100 χρόνια λοιπόν πριν από το σήμερα, 3 εξέχοντες χείοι, αναγνωρίζοντας το γεγονός ότι κάποιος πρέπει να καταγράψει τι συμβαίνει στο νησί, δεν σκέφτονται τα έξοδα και κάνουν μία πρόσκληση. Μία πρόσκληση στοιχείο αυτής της εποχής, όπως βλέπουμε σε αυτές τις εικόνες. Μόλις έχουν φύγει οι Τούρκοι, η Chios είναι ανεξάρτητη, η Chios έχει περάσει τα δύσκολη πυρπόληση της τουρκικής ναυαρχίδας, που ήταν ένα σπουδαίο γεγονός από τον Κανάρη για όλη την Ευρώπη, όχι μόνο για τη Χίο και την Ελλάδα, αλλά ακολούθησε η φοβερή σφαγή της Χίου, γεγονότα που ενέπνευσαν ζωγράφους και λογοτέχνες, με αποκορύφωμα τον πίνακα του Ντελακρουά και το ποίημα του Βίκτορο Σουγκότ, το Ελληνόπουλο. Ας μην το ξεχνάμε και αυτό. Το Περιλά γράφει στην εισαγωγή του βιβλίου του, και ξεκινάω έτσι με αυτό: «Ήρθα σκεπτικός στο σκοτεινό ύφαλο, εννοώντας στοιχείο, που τα νερά του αντανακλούν μεγάλα δάση, πλαγιές, παλάτια και κάποιες φορές το βράδυ ένα χορό κοριτσιών. Και αντί γι' αυτό συνάντησα ένα ευτυχισμένο νησί, απαστράπτουσας ομορφιάς, με ακμάζοντες θεσμούς και αποπνέουσα καλοζωία». Ο Γάλλος περιηγητής λοιπόν αναφέρει αυτά που κάπως έτσι θα είδε και ο Χριστόφορος Κολόμβος όταν έφτασε στο νησί, όταν δίπλα στη σιωπηλή πέτρα του Ομήρου φιλοξενήθηκε από τον Αντρέο Λομπάνκα, προετοιμαζόμενος να ξεκινήσει το ταξίδι του για την ανακάλυψη της Αμερικής. Ο Φίλιππος Αργέντης και ο Στήλπων Κυριακίδης έγραψαν ένα μνημειώδες έργο το 1946, «Η Χίος παρά τις γεωγράφεις και περιηγητές», και αναφέρονται όχι μόνο στις εντυπώσεις των περιηγητών, αλλά και στις απόψεις του φυσικού τοπίου, της γεωγραφίας του νησιού και των φυσιογνωμικών επιστημών, αλλά και από τις απόψεις της ανθρωπογεωγραφίας, ένα κομμάτι πολύ σημαντικό που μελετούν οι ερευνητές, και της εθνογραφίας, καθώς και της ιστορίας του πολιτισμού, πέρα από την πολιτική ιστορία εσωτερική και εξωτερική. Στοιχείο, όπως αναφέρθηκε, βρίσκεται το περίφημο μοναστήρι του 11ου αιώνα, η Νέα Μονή. Ένα παλιό ιστορικό μοναστήρι που ιδρύθηκε το 1042 και είναι γνωστό παγκοσμίως για την εξαιρετική τέχνη του ψηφιδωτά. Ένα μοναστήρι που το 1990 ανακηρύχθηκε μνημείο παγκόσμιας κληρονομιάς της UNESCO, με τα περίφημα ψηφιδωτά που αναγνωρίζονται σε όλο τον κόσμο. 112 χρόνια μετά από την ανεξαρτησία της Ελλάδος, πώς έχει εξελιχθεί της Χίου, πώς έχει εξελιχθεί αυτό το νησί και τι συμβαίνει? Ας πάμε να δούμε από τον κεντρικό Μητροπολιτικό Ναό των Αγίων Βικτόρων, που είναι και η πολιόχη του νησιού, αλλά και το τι κυριαρχεί σε πολιτισμό, σε επίπεδο πολιτισμού υλικού και άειλου. Κυριαρχούν τα μνημεία, οι τέχνες, η λογοτεχνία, η μαστίχα, τα βιβλία, οι εκδόσεις, η ποίηση, το εμπόριο, η ναυτιλία, τα εσπεριδοειδή. Ένα νησί που πλέον έχει και τμήματα του Πανεπιστημίου του Αιγαίου, έχει τα τμήματα διοίκησης επιχειρήσεων, ναυτιλίας, οικονομίας και τουρισμού, έχει την Ακαδημία του Εμπορικού Ναυτικού, όχι μόνο των εμποροπλοιάρχων αλλά και των μηχανικών, και φέτος έχει και την πρώτη ιδιωτική Ακαδημία Εμπορικού Ναυτικού TINS του Τσάκου. Έχει όμορφα και νέα σημαντικά στοιχεία. Όλα αυτά ενσωματώθηκαν από τις Χίους μετά την απελευθέρωση του 1912 και έτσι αναδεικνύονται και ξεχωρίζουν σε όλους τους τομείς της παράδοσης και του πολιτισμού. Πολλοί φορείς, όπως η Δημόσια Κεντρική Ιστορική Βιβλιοθήκη Αδαμάντιος Κοραής και Σωματεία στο νησί, πολιτιστικά εργάζονται προς την κατεύθυνση αυτή, όπως ο Φιλοτεχνικός Όμιλος Χίου, ο Μορφωτικός Σύνδεσμος Βαρβασίου, ο Λεωναλάτιος και πολλοί άλλοι. Υπάρχουν σπουδαία μνημεία στοιχείο. Αρχικά θα αναφερθούμε σε ναούς και μοναστήρια. Από τον Άγιο Ισίδωρο, την Αγία Μαρκέλα, τον Άγιο Μινά που βλέπουμε στην εικόνα και τους Άγιους Βίκτορες, μέχρι τον Αθανάσιο τον Πάριο, τους Κολυβάδες Γέροντες, τον Άγιο Μακάριο τον Οταρά, τον Άγιο Νεκτάριο που ήταν δάσκαλος στοιχείο και έγινε μοναχός στη Νέα Μονή, και τον Άγιο Άνθιμο, μαζί με την Παναγία τη Βοήθεια, το Μεγάλο Μοναστήρι, τη Νέα Μονή, τη Μερσινιδιώτισσα, ένας χώρος όπου λέγεται και Αγιονύση. Ένα νησί όπου οι σύγχρονοι υμνογραφούν, όπως ο Σεβασμιότατος Μητροπολίτης Μάρκος, στις μέρες μας και μας αφήνουν πολύ σπουδαία μνημεία προφορικού λόγου. Έχουμε πολλά μουσεία, όπως η Δημόσια Κεντρική Ιστορική Βιβλιοθήκη Korais, όπως το Αρχαιολογικό Μουσείο, το Βυζαντινό Μουσείο, το Μουσείο Μαστίχας, το Λαογραφικό Μουσείο Αργέντη, το Ναυτικό Μουσείο της Χίου, αλλά και το Μουσείο Λαϊκής Παράδοσης. Τα βοτσαλωτά βέβαια, που είναι τα πολύ χαρακτηριστικά στοιχείο, είναι αυτό που μας οδηγεί να σταθούμε λίγο σε σπουδαίους Έλληνες χιώτες που γεννήθηκαν και μεγάλωσαν στη Χίο, καθηγητές, επιστήμονες και φιλοσόφους, χαρακτηριστικά στην αστρονομία, την ιατρική και τη φιλοσοφία, όπως ο Σταμάτης Κρημιζής, πανεπιστημιακός και διαστημικός επιστήμονας και τώρα πρόεδρος της Ακαδημίας Αθηνών, και πολλοί άλλοι όπως ο Αδαμαντίος Korais από τους παλαιότερους, ο Ψυχάρης, ο Ροΐδης, ο Ήων και ο Όμηρος βεβαίως, σύγχρονοι όπως ο Φασουλάκης, η Γκιάλα, ο Άμαντος, ο Βάμβας, Μιχαηλίδης, Φραγκομίχαλος και Σπανός, αλλά θα σταθώ και σε δύο εξαιρετικούς που είχαν καταγωγή από τη Χίο, τον Πικιόνη, το σπουδαίο αρχιτέκτονα, από και οι δύο γονείς του ήταν από τη Χίο, αλλά και τον Μανώλη Τριανταφυλλίδη, τον γλωσσόλογο, που η μητέρα του ήταν το Γένος Ροδοκανάκη. Έτσι λοιπόν παντού οι χιώτες αναπτύσσονται και συνεχίζουν να δίνουν μια δυναμική παρουσία. Έχουμε ζωγράφους στις τέχνες όπως ο Ζημαράκης, ο Βενιάδης, ο Γιαλούρης, ο Γλίκας και οι σύγχρονοι όπως η Ντέο που κάνουν σπουδαία έργα τα τελευταία χρόνια. Έχουμε σπουδαίους χιώτες στη λογοτεχνία, στις εκδόσεις, όπου το νησί διαρκώς αναπτύσσει εκδοτική τέχνη, όλο τη βιβλιοδεσία, την παραγωγή, τις τοπικές εφημερίδες, τα τοπικά βιβλία, κείμενα, έρευνες και διατριβές, όπου τα παλιότερα χρόνια υπήρχε μαζί με την τέχνη και τα τελευταία χρόνια η παραγωγή συνεχίζεται πολύ όμορφα. Έχουμε τεχνίτες στοιχείο, αρχιτέκτονες, μηχανικούς, τεχνίτες βοτσαλωτών, της πέτρας για τα αρχοντικά, τις μάντρες, τα καμπαναριά, καραβομαγραγκούς, περιβολάριδες, σπουδαίους Έλληνες. Έχουμε βέβαια και την ανάπτυξη στις business, στις διάφορες στα επαγγέλματα, κυρίως με την Ένωση Μαστιχοπαραγωγών Χίου και άλλες παραγωγές σπουδαίων επιχειρηματιών. Η μαστίχο, όπως αναφέρθηκε, είναι ένα σπουδαίο προϊόν της Χίου, μοναδικό σε όλο τον κόσμο, αλλά και τα βοτσαλωτά είναι χαρακτηριστικά. Συνεχίζουμε μαζί με άλλους σπουδαίους και σημαντικούς ανθρώπους της Χίου στη μουσική. Έχουμε την Ένωση των Συνθετών από τη Χίο, τις Ινούσες και τα Ψαρά, που έγινε πολύ πρόσφατα στο Μέγαρο Μουσικής Αθηνών. Το Μουσικό Φεστιβάλ Χίου, που κάθε καλοκαίρι συγκεντρώνει από όλο τον κόσμο εδώ και 10 χρόνια σπουδαίους μουσικούς και δημιουργούς με σπουδαίους συνθέτες, τον Βενιάδη και τον Λεμό. Έχουμε παραγωγούς και σκηνοθέτες στο σινεμά, αλλά και κυρίως πολύ σημαντικούς ευεργέτες και εφοπλιστές όπως είναι ο Συγκρός, ο Λιβανός, ο Σκυλίτσης, ο Δρομοκαΐτης, ο Χανδρής, ο Τσάκος, ο Πατέρας, ο Λός, ο Φαφαλιός, Αγγελικούς, Ισφράγκος και άλλοι πολλοί που βέβαια δεν προλαβαίνουμε να μιλήσουμε για όλους, κάνουν σπουδαία έργα και στο νησί και σε όλη την Ελλάδα. Και προς το τέλος του 20ου αιώνα για τη Χίο έχουμε μια πολύ καλή εξέλιξη μαζί με την υπόλοιπη Ελλάδα. Αυτό που θα ήθελα να σταθούμε λίγο είναι ότι το 1992 θεσμοθετείται μια νέα κατηγορία μνημείων, τα πολιτιστικά τοπία. Πρόκειται για ένα σύστημα ανάδειξης πολιτισμικών στοιχείων εξαιρετικά γόνιμο, το οποίο αναγνωρίζει σαφώς την κοινωνική λειτουργία των μνημείων, αλλά και τις προφορικές παραδόσεις γύρω από αυτά. Και στοιχείο έχουμε αυτή την πολιτιστική κληρονομιά που αντιπροσωπεύεται από το τραγούδι, το χορό, μια παραδοσιακή χειροτεχνία. Το 1993 λοιπόν καθιερώνεται το σύστημα των Living Human Treasures, που είναι αυτή η θησαυρή της προφορικής παράδοσης και η Χίος εντάσσεται μέσα σε αυτό. Τι σημαίνει αυτό? Άειλη πολιτιστική κληρονομιά. Είναι οι προφορικές παραδόσεις και εκφράσεις είναι οι τέχνες του θεάματος, οι κοινωνικές πρακτικές με τελετουργίες και εορταστικές εκδηλώσεις, είναι γνώσεις και πρακτικές που αφορούν τη φύση και το σύμπαν και στην τεχνογνωσία που συνδέεται με την παραδοσιακή χειροτεχνία όπως είναι η φαντική, αγκιοπλαστική και άλλα έργα. Βέβαια η μαστιχοκαλλιέργεια, όπως αναφέρθηκε, είναι πολύ σημαντική και ξεχωριστή για το νησί. Αφορά τόσο το πεδίο των προφορικών παραδόσεων αλλά και την παραδοσιακή τεχνογνωσία αλλά και τη σχέση με τη φύση και το σύμπαν. Η Chios διαφυλάττει αυτή την παράδοση, την διασφαλίζει και γίνεται μια συνέχεια της άειλης πολιτιστικής κληρονομιάς που αλλάζει με το πέρασμα του χρόνου. Οι χιώτες διατηρούν την παράδοση, δηλαδή η μια γενιά παραδίδει και η άλλη γενιά παραλαμβάνει. Και αυτό που πετυχαίνουν οι χιώτες είναι με όπλο την παλιά γνώση που έχει χωνέψει καλά να προχωράει και να αντιμετωπίσει τις νέες συνθήκες, παράγοντας νέες γνώσεις, νέα έθιμα και πρακτικές που προσαρμόζονται στο σήμερα. Επιπλέον, η τοπική γνώση είναι αναντικατάστατη και κανείς σχεδιάζει μέτρα πρόληψης μέσα από αυτή τη βιωμένη εμπειρία. Ολοκληρώνοντας τη σημερινή εισήγηση, θα ήθελα να εντοπίσω ότι στη Chio βρίσκεται και ο περίφημος κάμπος, με ιδιαίτερο χαρακτήρα και σημασία. Εδώ συνδυάστηκε με τρόπο ιδανικό η κατοικία με την παραγωγική δραστηριότητα σε ένα πανέμορφο περιβάλλον, αρχοντικά περίπου 200 και περιβόλια με εσπεριδοειδή, τα διάσημα σίτρους σε όλο τον κόσμο, πορτοκάλια, μανταρίνια, νεράτζια, λεμόνια, κίτρα. Ο κάμπος αναπτύχθηκε κατά τη Βυζαντινή Αυτοκρατορία και μετά το 1695 ανέπτυξε ένα πρωτοφανή δυναμισμό, ιδιαίτερα το 18ο αιώνα. Σε συνεχή επαφή με τη Δύση και με την Κωνσταντινούπολη έδωσε εντυπωσιακά δείγματα πλούτου, προόδου και πολιτισμού. Μεγάλες χιώτικες εμπορικές οικογένειες όπως οι Μαυροκορδάτοι, οι Αργέντιδες, Ράλι, Νεγροπόντι, Ροδοκανάκη, Καλβοκορέση, Σγούτα, Σκυλίτσι, Πετροκόκκινη, Αγέλαστη, Συγκρή ανέδειξαν προσωπικότητες στα γράμματα και τις επιστήμες. Μέσα στα πλαίσια αυτής της ανάπτυξης και ακμής της Χίου δημιουργήθηκε αυτό το οικιστικό περιβάλλον του κάμπου, με τα χαρακτηριστικά, τα αρχιτεκτονικά υψηλής ποιότητας. Αυτό κυριαρχεί μέχρι σήμερα. Ο κάμπος της Χίου αναδείχθηκε στη Βενετία το Μάιο του 2016, ένα από τους 7 απειλούμενους τόπους της Ευρώπης, και στην παρουσία του Europa Nostra για την προστασία του μπόρεσα και καταφέραμε να είναι προστατευόμενο. Οι προσπάθειες διάσωσης έχουν μία διπλή κατεύθυνση. Αγροτικό περιβάλλον με σεβασμό στην παραδοσιακή αρχιτεκτονική και φυσιογνωμία του. Για τη συνέχεια της ιστορικής ταυτότητας και τη συνέχεια του πολιτισμού μας. Ο κάμπος με τα μαγκάνια, τα περιβόλια, τις στέρνες. Ωραίο νησί. Ευτυχισμένο νησί. Το σύντομο ταξίδι αναφορά στον πολιτισμό των τελευταίων 112 ετών ολοκληρώνεται σαν να ακουμπάμε λογοτεχνικά στο κουπαστή ενός πλοίου και να απομακρυνόμαστε από το λιμάνι. Αναμένα τα φώτα της αποβάθρας, εκεί που ακόμα και σήμερα οι κάτοικοι κάνουν τον περίπατό τους. Τα μεγάλα καφενεία με τα έντονα φώτα μας χαιρετούν με όλα τα καλούδια που παράγει το νησί και όλες τις ομορφιές. Ακολουθώ με τη σκέψη μου τα όμορφα καθαρά δρομάκια και τα παλιά τείχη και τα μπαλκόνια των Γενουατών. Ήσυχοι οι χιώτες ζουν μια ήσυχη ζωή. Ανάμεσα στα ιστιοφόρα και τις γαλέρες φαντάζομαι τους αυτοκράτορες και τους δόγιδες σε μια αρμονική σύνδεση με τους σύγχρονους ναυτικούς. Συγχρόνως πάνω στα κατάρτια βλέπω να κυματίζουν ο Άγιος Γεώργιος της Γένοβας, ο Λέοντας του Αγίου Μάρκου ή ο Κρίνος της Γαλλίας ή ο Κρίνος της Φλωρεντίας και η ελληνική σημαία. Και ποτέ δεν ξεχνάμε τα έπι του Ομήρου που έρχονται από τα βάθη των αιώνων να καταξιωθούν σε όλο τον κόσμο. Εδώ, στη Χίο, οι Άγιοι ευλόγησαν τα χώματα και εδόθηκε η χάρη να ενώνεται η Ανατολή με τη Δύση. Ωραίο νησί, ευτυχισμένο νησί. Σας ευχαριστώ πολύ.
Thank you. After that presentation, I'm ready to get my ticket to go to Chios. Oh wow! What a fantastic island! It's unbelievable. All right,
Thank
thank you
you.
so much, Aggeliki. Thank you for being with us today. Our next presenter is Alexander Billinis. Alexander is a lecturer at Clemson University's Honors College and Political Science Department. His thesis concerns and studies in Clemson's Department of History have included the study of Hellenic merchant marine in Hellenic national identity, as well as the role of the Hellenic cotton merchants in the middle 19th century, particularly in New Orleans and other southern ports, but also in Europe and the Mediterranean, and primarily Egypt. Alexander has lived and worked in the US, the UK, the Hellenic Republic, and Serbia, and proficient in a half dozen languages. His work experience includes commercial real estate, freelance legal and journalism work, and over a decade as an international banker in the United States and Europe. He is a licensed attorney and a prolific writer, journalist on Hellenic and Balkan topics and issues. He lectures widely on the legacy of Byzantium and is also a director of EMBCA. He is the author of two well-known books, The Eagle Has Two Faces, Journeys through Byzantine Europe, and Hidden Mosaics, an Aegean Tale. Welcome, Alexander, and thank you for being with us today.
As always, it's a pleasure to be here, Lou, and to meet, at least digitally, a number of distinguished panelists. Before we go to my presentation, which I would ask Kostas to pull up, I want to talk about a serendipitous event. We live at the foothills of the Appalachian Mountains here in Clemson, where I teach at Clemson University. But like most Greeks, we have a home on the shore, in this case, not the Mediterranean, but the Atlantic. And often when I drive to our home on the shore, I stop midway in a small southern town and go to a bookstore. They have a very large Southern history section. And as I was walking at eye level, looking for tomes about Southern history, I suddenly find this book, History of Chios. Oh, my Lord. There's a calling card in it from, let me get to it, the page. Mrs. Stephen Raleigh from Sussex County in the UK, and also compliments from Messrs. A.P. Raleigh and S.A. Mavrogianni, written by a Dr. Alexander Vlasto in London in 1912. Interestingly, among the people I've interviewed who are descendants of these cotton merchant families includes one gentleman in Richmond who knew the niece of the original owner. So to me, or actually to give credit, my wife said, this shows that there is an actual divine inspiration for you to study this topic more and more. So it's always a pleasure to talk about Chios. Chios is a central island. As the mayor indicated, 13% of global tonnage has an address, either Chios or Inousses. And that didn't happen by accident. It wasn't only the nautical skill of Chiotis, it was also a legacy of centuries of capital accumulation and of business skills. You don't just get this by accident. So I think that it's important to understand that the Chios shipping legacy is very much part of a long-term trend. If we can go to my presentations, in my particular case, I'm going to focus on the cotton trade. In addition to all the other fruits of the land from Chios, there's also cotton. As there is in much of the, as we would say, the Eladiko Horo, which of course also includes the coasts and hinterland of Asia Minor, where cotton to this day is one of their largest crops. But I think it's fair to say that if there was a king cotton, and let me explain for our listeners in Greece who may not know the term, King Cotton was coined by a senator from South Carolina, referring to the commercial power of cotton and the thought of many Southerners that cotton alone and the American South's production of cotton would sustain an independent South and would require the British and French to recognize Southern independence once the Civil War broke out. So that gives us an idea. I've often called this part of this lecture the Greek princes of King Cotton. But if you look at the names and where they're from, to be more specific, it was a Chios story. The church that you see here, this is a picture from, I believe, 1908. This was the first Orthodox church in the United States of any jurisdiction. And this was founded in New Orleans, built in 1866 in more of a typical style of Southern churches. And while the congregation was about 50% Greek, it also catered to other Orthodox nationalities, primarily Serbs, Syrians, and Russians. So I think it's important to show that the roots of Greeks in America, and particularly Chiotis in America, runs quite deep. If we can get to the next slide. Okay, so as Peter referred to in his map, more in terms of the ancient past, Chiotis got around. They got around in ancient times, and that same map could be a map of Chios houses from really the 1700s. The Chiotis established themselves in Alexandria, obviously nearby Smyrna, in Odessa, Taganrog, Marseille, Trieste. Wherever there were major import and export opportunities, you can be sure that the Chiotis were there. As the muscular American Republic was growing in the early 1800s, it obviously attracted the attention of Greek merchants. And New Orleans in particular, along with New York, became a spoke in this trading hub and the first Orthodox Christian community in the United States. And these Chios families, I think it's important to understand, they were often related by marriage or kubario. They were often from the same villages. So Peter's point about what village are you from, these families would understand that very well. And you would often have relatives working with relatives, whether or not they had the same name. And in researching this subject, it's very difficult to know who's related to who, but eventually you find out that they're all related. But long story short, these merchant houses were being set up all over the Atlantic economy and into Egypt and India. Next slide, please. Okay, so what did this Greek world look like in 1850? Well, you had a small, impoverished, independent Greece, much smaller than it is today. You had major merchant communities in Odessa, Trieste, Marseille, Alexandria, and Liverpool and London. But most of the Greek population, including Chios, remained in the Ottoman Empire. You had a growing merchant fleet that would be flying multiple flags. So the idea that Onassis was the first to switch to flags of convenience, well, my Hydriot ancestors would go from the Turkish to the Russian tricolor from before Greek independence. And Greek shipping have always had a specialty in bulk cargoes and commodities, particularly grain. And grains, we could do this conversation about Chiotis and grain as well, because the Russians basically subcontracted their transport to Chiotis and to the Greek merchant marine. So the entire wealth of what is now the Ukraine was being shifted into Western markets via the Chiotis and via the merchant marine, which was increasingly also Chiotis. I'd also mentioned that the Greek homelands have major cotton production. I think it's important to say that even though Greece was impoverished, the Chiotes, particularly in Syros, were some of their first industrialists, because really unbeknownst to most people who have this picture of independent Greece as an agrarian backwater with a wealthy shipping diaspora, the Chiotes in particular, the refugees from the Chios massacre, invested heavily in shipbuilding. So from the 1830s to the 1860s, Syros yards were producing a lot of the Greek merchant fleet ships, but they were also taking orders from other European ship owners. And they were competitive with yards in Italy, France, the UK, and the US. It's a subtext of history that we forget about when we talk about the narrative of Greece in the 19th century, which generally focuses on its agrarian nature and its poverty. By the way, this picture is of the Grand Canal in Trieste. To your right, you have the Serbian Orthodox Church of St. Spiridon. They also had a very large and related merchant present in Trieste, and my wife is Serbian, so that's just sort of a nod to the Serbian presence. But our guide, we were guests of the Trieste Tourism Bureau, said that neighborhood was the Orthodox neighborhood. You had Greeks, you had Serbs, you had Syrians and Russians, all really dominating the outgoing commerce of the Austrian Empire. Next slide. So by 1860, Chiotes were established in New York and New Orleans in the United States. I'm researching other smaller hubs, but definitely New York, as Lou mentioned, was the transshipment hub. And New Orleans, as we'll see from a map, was really the gathering point of all of the cotton production in the Mississippi Valley. So those were the export factors. And then there were the import factors, particularly in Liverpool, in Nantes, in Marseille, in France. And you also had a large Greek presence in Egyptian cotton since the 1830s. And in the 1850s and 1860s, you also had a growing Chiot presence in British India. The houses had affiliates on both sides of the transaction, which reduced the costs and increased the competitiveness of the Chios houses. And you also had trust via kinship networks and shared risk and experiences. This picture is from the Liverpool City's directories of 1860 of the Petrokokino merchant house, which also had branches in New York, Marseille, Odessa, and India. And I have a good friend, obviously a relative of this Dimitri Petrokokino in Athens. Οπότε στέλνω χαιρετίσματα στο Dimitri. His knowledge of the network and his knowledge of the genealogy and who's who has been very, very helpful. Next slide, please. So, about the merchants, family, kin-based, heavily intermarried with various families, often had, they were Greeks, they were, proud of their Greek background and heritage, but they would have multiple nationalities, passports, and locations in major hubs. Their businesses were vertically integrated when or where possible. But again, that did not mean that Chios merchants did not work with cotton growers of all backgrounds in the United States or with Egyptian cotton brokers. But on the transportation side, generally Chiotes would be on both sides. This picture is of Nicholas Benaki, who was the co-founder of the Holy Trinity Church in 1866 and he was also Greek consul in New Orleans. Next slide, please. So, Greeks in America up to 1850. Well, again, I'll throw a quick plug for my island, Hydra. From the archives that I visited the summer before last, there was clearly a network of Hydriot ships that would be traveling to the Americas, both North and South America. You have the colony of New Smyrna, which those descendants in the 1760s were largely dispersed and assimilated into Spanish or British Florida. Where Chiotes become prominent was right after the Greek Revolution, where many refugees and orphans were brought to the United States. And then from the 1840s, it was the merchants. The largest presence was in New Orleans, but also New York continued to grow, and then is the largest Greek center in the United States. The fellow on the right is George Korais, a Chios massacre and slavery survivor who became a U.S. Navy captain in the American Civil War. Next slide, please. So here gives you a picture of just how important New Orleans was, and that it drained the entire American continent. And it wasn't an accident that such a city was going to have a Greek presence, because they went where the opportunities were. But I always like to show this map because it gives you an idea, particularly before the railways became ubiquitous in the 1850s, 60s, and 70s, the absolute importance of this hub that emptied most of the American continent. And not surprisingly, Greeks were there. Next slide. I want to go into a little detail because this particular merchant I know a lot about, because I've interviewed his descendant who lives in Virginia, but also because I think that it gives a good portrait of a Chios merchant. In this case, there is a picture of him. He's the fellow in the beard sampling the cotton. And this was painted by the famous French painter Edgar Degas during his years in New Orleans. Aggeliki was a friend of his. So who was this Alexander Aggeliki? He was born in Chios in 1833 and came to the US in the 1850s, establishing himself in New Orleans. In 1862, when the Northern forces in the Civil War captured New Orleans, he left and first went to Britain, where again there was a large Chiot network, and then to Greece, where he married another Chiot, to Syros specifically, Polixeni Mavrokordato, and they went to India in 1865 to continue work on the cotton trade. His brother went to Egypt during the American Civil War to work in the cotton trade. And the reason for this was not accidental, because cotton supplies from the US were choked off as a result of the American Civil War. And Greek merchants who were so heavily involved in cotton worked to provide alternatives in the cotton fields of the Ottoman Empire, of Egypt, and of India. After the American Civil War was over, Aggeliki returned to the US, settling in New Orleans, and co-founded the Memphis Cotton Exchange. And he eventually settled in Norfolk, Virginia, where his descendants still live. I got an opportunity to interview his descendant, who again is an absolute textbook of information about the Chios merchants. But I think this portrait is typical of the type of person that the Chios merchant was: multilingual, cosmopolitan, well-traveled, and very, very able to adapt to political or economic trends. Next slide. So again, New Orleans became an important center, and the typical merchant, like Aggeliki, was usually a scion or relative of a merchant house. Now, in New Orleans, the Greek presence, relatively speaking, was small. They were market takers. Can we go to the next slide? But as I hinted earlier, in Alexandria, they were market makers. So Greeks, not just Chiotes, but as could be expected, the Chiotes formed a major part of the Greek population. The Greeks were the largest European population in Egypt. From 1839, Greeks controlled over a third of the cotton trade. And the Greek merchant fleet, which in the 1850s didn't have the global transatlantic and Pacific reach that it obviously has now and had after the normalization of the steam engine, but in the Mediterranean and Black Seas, the Greek merchant fleet was at the top of its form. So here again, you have an example of Egyptian cotton being shipped to Britain and France, and the entire operation, including production, would be Greek controlled. And because of their networks in the United States, the seeds they brought from the United States, the latest cotton gins, the Greeks used the latest American methods to try to produce cotton at a competitive price, but also importantly, cotton that would work with British mills, because the British, the French, the Prussians had all built their mills to work with American cotton. Not surprisingly, Egyptian cotton tripled in the Civil War, which eased cotton supply issues, which the Confederates, the Southern diplomats, thought would be the tipping point for Anglo-French intervention. And as I said, there was a complete vertical integration of this business in the hands of the Greeks. And again, the Chiotes formed a major part of that discussion. Next slide. So Lou already touched on this. I think you probably were talking from the same article from the New York Commercial and Financial Chronicle, but I'll just drop a few lines that I highlighted here. Large capital, harmony of action, coolness of nerve, a sagacity that astonished the ordinary business world, the influence of the Greeks at New York and Liverpool in the markets for cotton grain, among the most daring settlers of the Mediterranean. Talks about the merchant houses in the Mediterranean ports, the Liverpool, London, the French ports, Bombay, Calcutta, Rio, US southern ports, and 8 to 10 merchant houses in New York. I owe to Lou a lot of the detailed information when he referred this book by Michael Kondopoulos about the Greek merchant community in New York. You've got a list right here of a lot of the names that we would expect. Raleigh, Patrokokino, Fahiri, Rodokanaiki, Frangiadi, Scaramanga, Agelasto, Zizina, Scaramanga, Benaki, Psychaki, and of course, any number of Raleighs, because Raleigh was the largest Chiot merchant and intermarried with all the other Chios houses. But I often call this, you could call it like the Raleigh ecosystem. They were all over the place. Transaction paid on joint account. A Greek can ship cotton and grain where another cannot. As regards cotton, it is through them that a very large portion of our shipments are made. They are frequently better and more promptly informed than many other by reason of the free and full intercommunication among each other. It's a very important lesson of unity, of working together, of trust, and how it made this merchant class a real sub-headline in economic history that we don't think of. And there's no question that these firms helped to finance and intermarried with the shipping families. So when I mentioned that it's no accident that the mayor talks about 13% of global tonnage being Chios owned, well, part of the capital legacy that allowed that to happen came through these merchant houses. Next slide. So again, civil war caused an exodus. Many remained, but many left. And this is the home of one of the most famous New Orleans merchants, Nicholas Bernanke, whose cousin was the benefactor of who built the Bernanke Museum in Athens. And he's also his family is now, assimilated and intermarried, but there too, they keep in touch with their roots. And I think it's also important as Greek Americans, and Lou and I, and clearly Peter, are, we cherish our heritage. The fact is, the Greek American narrative didn't just start at the dawn of the 20th century. It's a lot older. Next slide. So this is significant, first of all, for global history, because one of the what ifs is, what if the British and French had to intervene in order to obtain Southern cotton? The world may be a very different place. You may have two republics in America, or more than that, instead of one. Did this play a role in keeping the British and French out, the availability of other cotton supplies? Well, that's remains to be proven, but I think it's a very strong theory. This expertise in shipping and in kin-based merchant networks and a tolerance of risk remains in the Greek merchant fleet, which for the past 50 years has been the largest in the world. And of course, the merchant class of New Orleans and New York was key in founding the first Orthodox communities in the United States. And it's an alternative narrative to the penniless immigrant story of Southern and Eastern European migration in the 20th century. Next slide. Okay, so here's a, again, I leave with this question: did these merchants change the course of history? This is from the London magazine Punch, talking about whether or not the British are going to recognize Southern independence. The fellow on the right with the plume in his hat is the Confederate President Jefferson Davis, and Lord Palmerston is walking with Lord Punch, the small fellow, and Lord Punch says, "That was Jeff Davis, Pam. Don't you recognize him?" And Lord Pam says, "Well, not exactly, but I may have to one of these days." So that's something that I'm researching. Stay tuned for that. So that's basically a quick and dirty discussion of an incredible diaspora, which the Chiotis and all Hellenes should learn more about and should be very proud of.
Thank you so much, Alexander, for that. Just a couple of comments more for the audience. In terms of the orphans of the Hellenic Revolution, two of those orphans were actually Raleigh's brothers. Okay, there were two brothers from the Raleigh family who came here, and we're talking about now the 1820s, early 1830s. So that's important. Also, there was a mention of Korais, the captain, but it's also important to note that one of his descendants obviously was an admiral in the U.S. Navy, so that becomes very important. And in terms of the cotton merchants, that was the most of the presentation that we heard from Alexander. In the United States, there was what we call the Cotton Exchange. And many of the directors of the Cotton Exchange were actually members that were discussed by Alexander. And so for many, many decades, they were actually on the board of directors of the United States Cotton Exchange. So it's very important, this discussion. And also the fact that, as Alexander mentioned, many times we talk about the immigrants, the poor immigrants that came from the countryside, from the United States. But the first Hellenes that came into America were actually merchants. And they were wealthy merchants. They weren't poor merchants. And a lot of the members that were mentioned by Alexander were in that particular class. Our next presenter is Markos Marinakis. He is the founder and president of Marinakis Chartering, Inc., and has for over 50 years had the experience in the shipping industry. He was born in Kardamylian, Chios, and he began his career as a merchant marine after high school. He has held key roles in maritime leadership, including 24 years on the board of American Steamship Owners Mutual P&I Association, and serving as a director for the Maritime Association of the Port of New York and New Jersey. Appointed by the U.S. President in 1996, he served on the Panama Canal Commission Board until 2000, the year 2000, later contributing to the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers Inland Water Users Board. In 2015, he was inducted into the International Maritime Hall of Fame. A proud Hellenic American, Mr. Marinakis is an archon of the Ecumenical Patriarchate, a Leadership 100 member, and an advocate for Hellenic Orthodox and community causes. A pioneer of the Aegean Federation of New York, he united Hellenic American and Canadian Aegean societies and presided over several Aegean organizations. He also founded the Kardamylian Foundation, Inc., supporting public works in Kardamylia since 1995. Mr. Marinakis resides in New York City with his wife, Maria, and they have 3 wonderful children and 5 grandchildren. Welcome, Markos, and thank you for being with us today.
Καλησπέρα σας, και άκουσα τα περισσότερα και πραγματικά συγκινήθηκα να ακούσω την ιστορία της Χίου και από τον Πίτερ και από τον Δήμαρχο και από τον Πίτερ Γεραζούνη και από την Αγγελική και τον Αλέξανδρο. Βέβαια, εδώ οι Χιώτες είναι από το 1860, όπως ανέφερε ο Αλέξανδρος, έχουν κατακτήσει θέσεις, όπως ο Μπενάκης ήταν consul in New Orleans και ο Ράλης, he was appointed by President Lincoln as a very good cotton merchant. Now, the Raleigh brothers, they were in England, and then they moved to India, and with other Hyotes, they established the big commerce with India and England. At one point, the Raleigh brothers were considered the exclusive merchants of wheat to India. But I will go and say a few things about shipping, because this is my field. And of course, I will add a few things about the Greek American community in America. As I served president of the Hughes Societies of USA and Canada, and actually in 1985, I united them. I brought Canada into the Hughes Society. So here in America, there are about 68 societies. They were then in 1985. Now, of course, are lessened. And of course, I was very happy to hear Peter Gerazounis, because he now is the president of the oldest society. We have over 112 years, the Korais Society of New York, which was the mother of the rest of the societies we have here. But nevertheless, for the shipping, the Chians for millennia are known to be involved in shipping. As a matter of fact, when the naval battle occurred in the Aegean against the Persians, the Chians contributed 100 ships out of the total 351 ships the rest of the Greeks contributed to the fight, to the sea battle. And they continue to be around the shipping because I don't know the reasons. My own explanation is because reading the Chios was Pitiusa has a lot of forest. It was green from end to end. It has the timber needed to build the ship. So the Chians, they were always around the shipping. And of course, we arrive in the Second World War when the Chians contributed so many ships to the Allied efforts, including Echoti to have at the time, at the peak of the war, about 40 of his vessels leased to the American government to carry the war material and supplies for the Allied efforts to Europe. That was Stavros Livanos, and he was every day in the offices of the admirals, and they were trying to find out what news he was receiving from the high seas in the Atlantic. And then the US government sold 100 Liberty ships after the war to the Greek ship owners. And of course, Livanos, because of his losses, he successfully received about 25% of the whole 100. Actually, there were 108 ships sold to the Greek ship owners at the time. And that was probably the beginning of the new era that we have, that the shipping, as the mayor say, 13% are either registered at the Chios registry or owned by Chians around the world. It is correct that the Chians today, they own more than 50% of the Greek shipping. They control, rather, more than 50% of the Greek shipping. And among the biggest ship owners, they have probably the 5 most successful and largest ship owners in the Greek fleet and the largest in the world. A couple of those are among the largest ship owners in the world: the Aggeliki family and the Frankos family, the Tsakos, the Livanos, Korais, and other families that we heard before. Today, they as the Greek fleet is consisted of 21% of the tankers and 23% of the dry cargo and containers. The Chians represent over 50%. And that's an achievement that keeps with the tradition of the Chiotes throughout the history. With this, of course, we have a history of that, because we know Columbus moved to Chios to attend merchants' exhibition. He stayed there. He learned the language as we see in his logs, that he mentioned stories in Greek. So, and of course, the legends say that he took his merchants, his crew from Chios when he embarked on the historic trip in 1452 that to reach the West Indies and discover America. And then, of course, when Constantine Canaris made the big hero on June 6, 1822, became the big hero by exploring and taking revenge for the massacre of Chios. He came to Chios and took advice from expert captains of Chios and led him to have the successful expedition and took revenge against the Ottoman Turks for the massacre of Chios. Then, of course, he was so important, Canaris was so important in assisting the Greek Revolution that the Turkish fleet was afraid to come off the Dardanelles and supply the Turkish armies that they were trying to kill the revolution down in Peloponnese, Moria. And today the tradition of shipping continues. Chios is considered η ναυτομάνα της Ελλάδας. Έχει σχολές όπως ακούσαμε πλοιάρχων και μηχανικών και από αυτές τις σχολές αρκετοί που έχουν αποφοιτήσει τα διπλώματά τους ισχύουν σαν να είναι doctorate, PhD in the industry, in the shipping industry. They established here in America after the Second World War, and because Greece was involved in the Civil War and the rest we know, so they created big offices όπως ο Λιβανός, ο Νάσης, ο Νίαρχος, and follow up by the others, and today it continues that they have offices in the United States. I involved in shipping all my life since I embarked in Merchant Marine after graduate at high school, and then about over 50 years I'm living in the United States and engaged with the shipping industry, and keep on. We established an office in Greece about 35 years ago, and we have an office here in New York. But I have to say that also one of the major social events that the Aegeans created is considered the establishment of the Aegean Federation in New York 50 years ago, in 1974. And since that, the federation was born by the Korais Society of New York, the strongest and the oldest society. Today it has about 29 societies and is leading the Aegeans in the United States, representing the Chiotes well by involving in the national issues and supporting the island for the last 40 years very well. I mean, the last 40 years, in 1995, in a convention in Chios, the Aegean Federation, in cooperation with all the Chiotes around the country, delivered the first CAT scan outside Athens in 1995, together with other supplementary medical supplies. And at the same time, they invited 3 American congressmen, the ones that they were running the Maritime Committee and the Maritime Transportation of the United States, and they spent 10 days on the island in 1995. The mayor, Dr. Malafis, the mayor, he was there, and he knows that we brought the CAT scan then because he's ο ίδιος είναι ακτινολόγος, γιατρός ακτινολόγος. So then we follow up with supplies to microfiche to the library. The first class of computers at the University of the Aegean was donated by the Aegean Federation in coordination with the rest of the Aegeans around the country. And we continue every time we have a need from the hospital or from Chios. We all work together here, the Aegeans around the country, and support it. Lately, with the COVID, we supplied the minute the Bishop of Chios built a small hospital room there to treat the COVID issues. The Aegean Federation immediately supplied the 2 ventilators. And a couple of years ago, supplied a special bus for the AMEA children, plus 4 containers with material for the hospital and the regional hospitals in Billinis and Kardamylian. All these things went the last 5 years, mostly. Now we are ready to tackle the autism, and we committed to pay the studies to establish an autism center in Chios. And of course, right now as we speak is a fundraising to supply 5 dialysis machines for the hospital that have been requested since last year. So, but of course, I must say that all these efforts happen because we are over 100,000 in America and Canada. And everywhere we go, in every state that there is a Greek church, you find Chiotes being the backbone of the community. And this is very encouraging because really the Chiotes, they keep up with the tradition. They keep up with the nicotrio they brought from Chios, and they love the island very much, and we feel very proud that we come from Chios. With this, I like to close saying that this Saturday, the Aegean Federation of New York, which is the biggest society outside Greece, from all societies existed, the Laconians, Peloponnesians, Macedonians, Athenians, Aegean Federation is the biggest organization, is celebrating its 50th anniversary next Saturday here in Astoria. With that, I like to close. I have to thank Luis for organizing that and all the panelists that very, very efficiently describe the history of Chios. With that, I like to close.
Thank you, Marco, and thank you for being with us today. For the audience, not so much for the panelists, I'd like to mention a couple of things that Markos went into, because it's very important. Many people don't realize that the Hellenic shipping fleets from the 1920s to the 1930s, they were also among the largest in the world, and they were growing rapidly. But what happened was, because World War II started with the various Nazi invasions, and what took place is that the ships were actually used to save Europe before, during the World War II. And you had a situation where they were transporting arms and food into Europe and into England, and they were targeted specifically for that particular reason, and why most of the fleet was destroyed. Maybe 67-70% of the Hellenic fleet was destroyed before Greece got into World War II, because they specifically targeted the Hellenic ships. That's why, as Markos indicated, very important, as Markos indicated, that when the war was over, America realized what took place, and in really in support of the loss and the ships that were lost, they looked at the Chiotes in particular, of course, as people that they wanted to sell the Liberty ships to. And as Markos indicated, there was about 108 Liberty ships that were given. They paid much less than other people, by the way, specifically for that particular reason. And that was the genesis of the modern Hellenic fleet that we know today as being the largest in the world. I will indicate also a couple of other things, because again, you're the second person, Marco, who mentioned Christopher Columbus. So I have to say a couple of other items which I didn't say when Peter was speaking. One of them was that, of course, Christopher Columbus wrote his name in the Hellenic. That was the first thing. Christopher Columbus never talked about his relatives except for one relative, okay, who was a French pirate who was of Greek ancestry. Also, Christopher Columbus mentioned the particular soil of where he came from, where that particular soil only comes from Chios. So I will end with that, because I didn't want to get into discussion about Christopher Columbus, but I think it's very important to note. With that, I'm going to, if you can, just open up your, we're going to have an open conversation right now. So open up, please, everyone, so we can speak all together. I would like, if we can, to start with the mayor of Chios, because he obviously listened to a lot of these conversations. So if you can, Giannis, mayor of Chios, give us your thoughts on what you heard today. In other words, από αυτά που άκουσες σήμερα, Πες μας τις ιδέες που πήρες από αυτό το μήνυμα. Γιάννη, unmute.
Το μικρόφωνο, το μικρόφωνο.
Συγγνώμη, άκλεισε το μικρόφωνο. Ακούσαμε και είδαμε υπέροχες ψηφίδες από τη Χίο μέσα στους αιώνες. Πολύ καλή δουλειά από όλους. Αυτό θα μπορούσε να γίνει στο μέλλον θεματικά ένα-ένα, για να μπορέσουμε ουσιαστικά να φτιάξουμε κάτι που θα μπορούσε να είναι ένα μικρό βιβλίο για τους πιο νέους και ειδικά αυτούς που δεν μιλάνε την ελληνική γλώσσα, τους Έλληνες της Αμερικής και όχι μόνο, και των άλλων πόλεων που ζουν ομογενείς δικοί μας, για να μπορέσουμε να το εκδώσουμε και να το βγάλουμε. Λίγο πιο εύπεπτο. Μια παρουσίαση, ας πούμε, κάτι μεταξύ της κυρίας Μαστρομichalaki και του Πέτερ και του Αλεξάνδερ. Το οποίο θα γίνει λίγο πιο εκλαϊκευμένο για να μπορεί να είναι πιο καλό, ας πούμε. Αλλά που να κάνει ένα ταξίδι μέσα στην ιστορία. Πάντως, πάρα πολύ ωραίο πολύ δυνατό, για πολλούς και διαφορούς λόγους. Μόνο και μόνο που είμαστε Νέα Υόρκη, Αθήνα, Χίος, σε μια γραμμή, μόνο και μόνο αυτό είναι σημαντικό.
Thank you, Mayor. I think what's important to our audience, the fact that today we're speaking both in the Hellenic language and in the English language. As the mayor indicated, that to have it in two languages, what we discussed, is extremely important. Μας έχεις βοηθήσει σήμερα, Γιάννη, με τα ελληνικά σου και η Αγγελική, γιατί εμείς στην Αμερική πολλές φορές δεν μιλάμε τόσο πολύ για τα ελληνικά, γιατί είμαστε στην Αμερική και μιλάμε τα εγγλέζικα. However, I think that this particular session, both in Greek and English, becomes very important. Okay, because this is also a way for us in America to get a little bit more of our language, and at the same time in Hellas, for them to understand the strength and power of the diaspora. Today we spoke of the diaspora from Chios. What I found very interesting was Markos. Markos said, Markos, is this correct? Is 100,000 Chiotes in the United States? Marco, are you on? Marco.
Yes, I'm on. It is over 100,000 Chiotes in America.
Okay, so think about this. There's more Chiotes in America than there are in Chios. I find this actually unbelievable, and it's a tremendous thing, quite frankly. So the discussion is open now. So whoever wants to ask any question from anybody or have any type of dialogue, please ask.
I'll just say very briefly, my non-Chian friends at cocktail parties are really going to hate me now, because before, as much as the Chiotes can be really annoying to them, we always take credit for Christopher Columbus, whether he was born in Chios. I think it's a fact that he came to Chios before 1492. He went and discovered America. I always joke, the only place in the world that he would find people crazy enough to sail off the edge of the earth, he'd go to Chios, and he found Chiotes who were crazy enough to go with him to sail off the edge of the earth. So that's the one thing. We wouldn't have discovered America without the Chiotes. And now also today, I learned that if it wasn't for the Chiotes, then we would have the United States and the Confederation of the United States.
Well, I haven't proven that yet.
It's not proven yet, but that's one of the theories.
No, you don't understand the Chiotes, though.
Yeah.
I'm going to take it and run with it.
Yeah, well, I do think, that is, I think that's a story that needs, if I can replicate Aggelistos' story with other examples, and that's where I'm going to do a shameless plug. that's where the Chiotis themselves will be able to provide a lot of help, because I heard what the mayor said about doing some sort of publication or some sort of events that'd be a bit more specific, and I think that needs to be done. Για οποιαδήποτε διάλεξη, κύριε Δήμαρχε, είμαι παρόν. Δηλώνω παρόν, γιατί θα ήθελα πάρα πολύ να επεκτείνουμε αυτή τη συζήτηση και ο ρόλος των Χιώτων, τη διασπορά γενικά και οι δεσμοί που υπάρχουν, όχι μόνο τώρα, γιατί τώρα, I'll just say this part in Greek, για όσους είναι στην Ελλάδα και ελληνόφωνοι, σκεφτόμαστε τώρα ότι έχουμε τη μεγάλη διασπορά στην Αυστραλία, Γερμανία, Αμερική, Καναδά, αλλά η αλήθεια είναι ότι υπήρχε ανέκαθεν αυτή η διασπορά. Η ίδρυση του νέου ελληνικού κράτους έχει όχι μόνο τις ρίζες των ντόπιων, αλλά και οι διασπορικές ρίζες. Και χωρίς τους δύο δεν πρόκειται να είχε γίνει η επανάσταση και να έχουμε την ελεύθερη Ελλάδα του σήμερα. So back to English, I think it's vital that we have these conversations, that we leverage the knowledge and the expertise and the local passions of people who are very proud of their regions of origins. I'm a Hydriot. I think that that needs no introduction in terms of our pride and our role of the Hydriots at sea. I'm also Peloponnesian, so like Lou, I'm very aware that without the Moria, this conversation wouldn't have been happening either. But I think it's very important that we continue to build this network of discussion in both languages and invite our non-Greek friends to learn about it, because again, I've been to the last port of call of Columbus in the Eastern Hemisphere on the island of La Gomera in the Canary Islands. And my family and I are around a statue of Columbus, and I'm whispering in his ear, asking, Chiotis iste? This is important, okay? This brings the role of Greeks into the larger economic, historical picture, not just in the past, but in the present. And I think Lou's point about the bridge of ships that saved Britain and saved Europe and turned the tide. Greeks were saying Ochi before Ochi Day. My grandfather's buried at sea off the North Carolina coast, like so many Greeks that, met a watery end. These are stories that also are of interest to our friends who aren't Greek. And I think if you want to make the Greek story permanent, assimilate it into other stories.
Well, thank you, Alexander. And part of the reason why we're doing these journey and reflection series relates to that, to bring basically Hellenism within Hellas and also Hellenism within the diaspora a little bit closer together. I think what the mayor said was extremely important, and Aggeliki, you should take this seriously, by the way. I think when he mentioned to have a series of dialogues on specific areas of Chios, and Peter, this is important, by the way. In other words, you can have, we can do, if you want, we can do a series, and you can do a series of specific areas within Chios history, Chios industry, and things of that nature, and do it both in English, because I think it's important for the diaspora, especially when Marco told me there were over 100,000 Chiotis in the United States. So I think it's important to do this series, and I think it will also get you members, Markos and Peter, into your particular, diaspora organizations. And I think Aggeliki is the perfect person to help us put this together. In terms of what Alexander just said, I think it's very important to understand that a lot of the ships that were on the water when when Mussolini invaded Greece during Yochi Day in 1940, on October 28th of 1940, a lot of the ships were on the water. A lot of the Hellenic ships were on the water. Many of those ships had to go to other ports. And many of those ships, by the way, the Hellenic ships, came into America. And some of the merchant marines who came into America, they actually landed in America and then joined the American Army. And also important, what I mentioned before in terms of the merchant ships, that had to do with also the State Department after World War II was over. The State Department went and said to the Greek ship owners, who many in that case, their headquarters were in New York. Many of the headquarters of the shipping giants, let's say, the Hellenic shipping giants, were in New York, in lower Manhattan. And that had to do with the formation of the Hellenic American Chamber, which was formed by the State Department, speaking to those shipping owners, let's say, of the companies, and asking them to form a Chamber of Commerce. So that's more for the audience, because I think it's kind of important for us to understand that Hellas, the United States, Chios in the United States are basically grounded. Aggeliki, any thoughts and questions about what we were discussing today?
Πραγματικά είναι πάρα πολύ ενδιαφέρουσα όλη η συζήτηση και νομίζω ότι αναδείξαμε περισσότερο το δυναμισμό των Ελλήνων, των χιωτών, αυτό που γνωρίζαμε, αλλά και ένα κομμάτι της ιστορίας που ίσως δίνει μια δυναμική για πρότυπα. Αυτό που λέμε ότι στην εποχή μας τα παιδιά μας δεν έχουν πρότυπα, να έχουν, ξέρετε, κάποιους σημαντικούς που έκαναν σπουδαία πράγματα, το ξέραμε γνωρίζοντας την ιστορία, αλλά η διασπορά είναι η σύγχρονη ιστορία τα τελευταία 100-150 χρόνια και νομίζω ότι αυτό είναι πάρα πολύ σημαντικό. Με πολύ χαρά να συμβάλλω και εγώ, βεβαίως, και στις δύο γλώσσες, ελληνικά και αγγλικά είναι απαραίτητο, και θα ήταν ωραίο να κάνουμε κάτι για τα παιδιά μας, διότι οι χιώτες παντού τα καταφέρνουν, αυτή είναι η αλήθεια. Ναι, χαιρόμαστε γιατί μοιραζόμαστε τον Όμηρο και παλεύουμε ότι είναι χιώτης, και για τον Κολόμβο απλά πέρασε, να πω έτσι, έχοντας διαβάσει λίγο την ιστορία. Δεν ήταν χιώτης, πέρασε από τυχείο, αλλά λένε ότι άφησε παιδιά στοιχείο. Οπότε υπάρχει και όλη αυτή η ιστορία. Και πολλοί άλλοι, αλλά και η ναυτιλία μας που ανθίζει σε όλο τον κόσμο. Δεν ξέρω αν τα νέα Ελληνόπουλα και στην Ελλάδα και στο εξωτερικό της ελληνικής ναυτιλίας και των χιωτών στον κόσμο. Λοιπόν, στη διάθεσή σας, τη δυναμική των χιωτών την γνωρίζουμε, την είδαμε λίγο περισσότερο. Για τον Αγέλαστο ήταν μια σπουδαία προσωπικότητα και μπορούμε να βοηθήσουμε μέσω της βιβλιοθήκης Αδαμάντιος Korais τον κύριο τον Αλέξανδρο, γιατί έχει μια ιστορία και έχει και δρόμου στοιχείο Αγελάστου πριν φύγει να πάει στην Αμερική. Άρα λοιπόν μας δόθηκε μια ευκαιρία σε αυτό το σεμινάριο να ανταλλάξουμε σκέψεις, ιδέες, να οραματιστούμε για το μέλλον και να αφήσουμε κάτι ως παρακαταθήκη στα παιδιά μας. Αυτό θα ήθελα να πω και ευχαριστώ για την ευκαιρία που μου δώσατε να είμαι μαζί σας.
No, thank you. Είναι λίγο αργά στην Ελλάδα. So we're gonna wrap it up now. So some final words. Τελευταία λόγια να πούμε. Θα αρχίσουμε από το κύριο Malafis. Τελευταία λόγια για τη βραδιά.
Εγώ σαν συμπέρασμα θα πω ότι τελικά μέσα στους αιώνες, αν θα ψάξεις, σε όλα τα μεγάλα γεγονότα που έχουν σημαδέψει την ιστορία της πατρίδας μας, όλο και κάποιο χιώτη θα βρεις από πίσω, η χιώτισσα.
Thank you so much. Aggeliki, some final thoughts for the evening?
Να μπορέσουμε και εμείς να ακολουθήσουμε βήματα σπουδαίων χιωτών και να προσφέρουμε στη σύγχρονη εποχή. Αυτό.
Thank you. Peter, some thoughts, final thoughts for the evening?
Thank you, Lou, again, and everybody for participating. I just want to, not to start a whole other conversation, but three things. Again, I'm going to try to say it in both. Language is important. I don't want anybody to believe that Peter doesn't want to speak Greek. I try. It's hard to shift gears and change back and forth, but every day I'm learning, I'm getting better. And I do want my children and I want other people of the diaspora to learn. But it's just as important for them to learn about their heritage. And as important, the three things that are all tied together: heritage, language, and and religion, thriskia, kleronomia, glossa, in only the many together. And we have to just figure out a way to resonate amongst αυτούς που είναι στην Αμερική, να τα μαθαίνουν, να τα αγαπάνε και να τα ανεβάσουμε.
Thank you so much, Peter. Alexander, some thoughts?
The only thing I'd say, and I'll try in your honor, Lou, to say it laconically, is the Chiotis are an example of the asymmetric power of Hellenism. And for us to continue on that legacy, we need to learn how they did it in the past.
Thank you for those laconic words.
I hope it was laconic.
No, it was laconic. No, it was laconic. Yeah. Marco, some final thoughts, ideas?
Yes, thank you very much, Lou, for having the thought and putting these excellent panelists in together. I enjoy here the mayor, Alexander, Aggeliki, and Peter. Excellent. It was a very good opportunity for us to put Chios up where Chios belongs to. And bravo. Okay, if you continue, I will be around. And if by any chance I can be of help, I'm here.
Marco, we're going to tap into you. We're not going to let you go. You're there, and we're going to make sure you stay with us.
Yeah, we've got this recorded.
Yeah, Marco, we recorded you. Anyway, thank you.
Όλοι καλά.
Thank you.
Happy Thanksgiving για όσους είναι στην Αμερική.
Thank you.
Στην Ελλάδα όλα καλά. Καλή επιτυχία, καλή συνέχεια. Καληνύχτα σας.
This was an amazing panel, and thank you all for being here. To the audience, our next panel is going to be on December the 1st. It'll be the 5th Hellenic East Mediterranean Energy Independence Forum webinar. So join us on that occasion. And to everybody, as Markos said, Thanksgiving is coming. Happy Thanksgiving to all. And thank you for all the people who listened to us today. And Chios, after listening to this, I'm going to get a plane ticket and I'm flying to Chios. Thank you all for being with us.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.